So we're going to continue our conversation here about creation, the fall, it's a sin, and the ramifications of everything that kind of comes after that. So we're actually in our third week talking about this already, though we are, thanks to our small group rotation, we're a little further into the school year than that. So if you feel like 3 weeks is not long enough, that's probably why. But what we're talking about, you guys, when we talk about creation in the fall, is how God made things to be, and the discontinuity that now exists. And by discontinuity, I mean it was one way, it was perfect, and now it's not. So tonight we're going to start talking about this world that God has made, sort of taking a step back and looking at the creation itself. You guys mind if I pray real quick? I want to collect my thoughts as we get ready to talk. So Lord, I just want to ask that as we open your word now, that you would bless and honor it. Lord, you always bless your word. We know you'll do that. But help our hearts to be sensitive to where you're leading. Lord, let us be attentive. Let my heart be attentive as I recount the things that you've taught me as I've been studying. So I ask, Lord, that you would just not let us walk out of this room tonight unchanged. And Lord, may we have a greater appreciation for your plan, for your world, for this thing you've made. So we just thank you, we praise you, and we give this time to you. It's in your name that we pray. Amen. All right, so you guys can open up to Genesis 1. We're asking this question tonight: what is this world that God has made? We've looked a little bit about, in just a bite-sized portion, who is this God who made us? And then we looked a little bit at who we are, who God made us to be, all right? And now we're going to look at this world. What is this world that God has made, and what is it for? All right, so we're going to say three things tonight. I'm just going to put the first one up here. Number one, all creation. That is everything in the created order. Everything in the cosmos, everything we see with our eyes, everything you can't see with your eyes, but you can see with a microscope, that kind of thing, right? Everything that exists was made by God, formed by God, and it was perfect, all right? And the reason why we know that is because God calls creation good. So look with me at Genesis 1, verse 10. All right, Genesis 1, verse 10. God is making the waters and heavens to be gathered in one place, and God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas, and God saw that it was good. It was good. It was good. Look at verse 12. All right? God's making the vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kinds, and trees bearing fruit, in which is their seed, each according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. All right? You should be noticing a trend already. Right? Verse 18. All right? He's making the lights to rule over the heavens, to give light to the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. It was good. All right, fantastic, great. You get the point, all right? 5 times in this passage, God makes something, he shapes something, he sets it where it's supposed to be, and then he proclaims it to be good, all right? Nothing that's made, nothing that we see, again, was made independent of him. He is the only one who's eternal. Everything else is made by him, and he calls it good. Now, what does it mean that God calls creation good? Okay, for you, when you hear God saying, this is good, I made it this way and it's good, I made it this way and it's good, what does that mean? Heavy. It's perfect, all right? Ariel, what were you going to say? Content. Asa.
It's what God wants.
It's what God wants. I love that.
It's pleasing to God.
It's pleasing to God. Great. Other thoughts, other words? God made it and it is good. Michael.
It's without flaw.
It's without flaw. Awesome. Okay. Anything else? All right? Guys, these are all great words, okay? What I want us to think about tonight is the fact that when God makes something good, I want us to think about the other types of things in this world that we tend to call good, all right? What do we usually apply the word good to when we're describing something?
Food.
Good food, all right? Excellent. Give me something else you call good. Sports.
Good play.
Good sports play.
Yeah.
A good player, right? Or a great play.
That was such a good play.
That was a good play, right? You scored, a basket, and it was awesome. Okay.
A good movie.
A good movie. Fantastic. Okay.
Good book.
A good book. All right. Good grades. All right. Good grief. What's that?
A good partner.
A good partner. Okay, fantastic. Somebody else? I saw a hand somewhere over here.
Good morning.
A good friend.
Good morning, good friend. Okay, here's my question, all right? When we describe these things as good, does everybody else have the same opinion about them?
No.
Probably not.
Ice cream
All right? So I'll just use Dawson's. Dawson's, you said a good morning, right? It's a good morning. How many of you have had somebody say good morning to you and are super pleasant about it when you're having a rotten morning? All right? Is that anybody else in this room? All right? You're just like, My morning could not be further from good than is humanly possible, right? And yet I'm going to say good morning because I don't want people to know just, the level of crazy that's going on inside, right? Okay? So here's the thing. When we call things good, it's usually something subjective. It's something relative. Now, there are ancient great works of art, right? Like the Sphinx, okay? And you would look at that and say, man, that is a marvel of engineering, right? How in the world did, with the technology that existed in ancient Egypt, did they build that thing, right?
Brick.
How did they work on, right? So yes, with bricks. That's exactly the answer, okay? How did they do that, right? And even though we look at it and it's worn and it's faded, we would say that is good, right? That is an awesome thing. We maybe would do the same thing about art, but art and all these things that we named are taste-related things, right? And so they're subjective, right? It's our opinion that kind of is attached to them. So what I want us to see, you guys, everybody come back to me. When we talk about God saying that He's making creation good, right? It's not that it's this subjective thing that only God thinks is good. It is the standard of goodness, right? Because He is good, He imprints His goodness on it, right? All the things that He makes, that means they have a purpose that is not flawed, right? But it also means, you guys, that everything He makes is in its created and an ordained place for it to be, all right? And by that, I mean that God alone is the one who's worthy of worship. Though He calls creation good, all right, and He makes it for a purpose, it's God who's to be worshipped. It's not the created thing. Does that make sense? All right? He's giving it goodness, but ultimately it reflects His quality, reflects His goodness. All right? Ace, do you have a question? What did I do? I dropped something. Oh, I dropped Hannah Geeson's camping money. So let me hold on to that. I don't want her to lose that. Thank you, Asa.
You're welcome.
All right. So let's carry on, all right? Now, and again, we would look at this. We'd say, this is great. This is awesome. This is beautiful artwork, right? But maybe some people would. I don't know. Egyptians think it's fantastic, all right? But here's the thing. You look, it's missing a nose, right? It's missing a nose. Why?
It's not good.
It's not good, okay? Why is it not good?
It fell off.
It fell off. Why did it fall off?
Because it wasn't.
It's old. It's old, all right? The things that we make in this world, they wear down. They get old. They don't last, all right? So our world, you guys, while we would say it is good because God made it to be good, it is no longer perfect. Now, that's not because God's design was flawed. That's not because God did something wrong in the creation process. It's because we sinned. Mankind sinned, and all of a sudden, everything in our world is affected by that. Only sin causes brokenness. And for us, this is kind of what we're used to now, right? We are used to things getting old, breaking down, and disappearing, right? People dying, people getting sick, all right? That's kind of what we're used to. But that's not the way it was in the beginning. Let me read for you a portion. This is Paul David Tripp, great writer. He talks about, in this book, Instruments in the Redeemer's Hand, the beginning. I just want to read a little bit of this to you. He's describing the beginning, all right? He says, for a brief period of time, when God created the world, perfect people walked through a perfect world in perfect union with God. The environment was lush and rich, with a menagerie of animals that inhabited the air, land, and sea. Every physical and spiritual need was fully met. There were no unfed stomachs or diseases to be feared. The gardens were free of worms and thorns. Man and woman, Adam and Eve, lived in perfect union with each other. There was no unhealthy competition, no power struggle, no vengeance. There were no secret plots or harsh words, no fear, guilt, shame, or rebellion against authority. There was understanding, communication, and love. There was no struggle with identity, anxiety, depression, or addiction. There was no painful personal history to overcome. There was no fear of what might happen next, no mixed motives, no struggle with inordinate desires. There was no temptation to sin. Remember, we talked about that, right? They were made without a sin nature, and so there was no temptation to sin. He goes on to say this, with God, too, there was a perfect union. People loved, worshipped, and obeyed as they were created to do. In the cool of the day, they actually walked with God in the garden, enjoying perfect fellowship with their Maker. They were God's resident managers, placed there to govern what He had made, and they did their job well. God had no reason to confront them, and they had nothing to confess. All was right day after day. Life was better than anything we could imagine from our sin-scarred vantage point. But sadly, it didn't last long. In the most significant, rebellious act ever committed, man and woman stepped outside of God's ordained plan. In a second, it all came crashing down. All the amazing beauty of that world was deeply and permanently scarred. All right? I love the way he captures that. This beautiful picture. It's not just that the leaves are pretty and the flowers are beautiful, right? And the garden smells amazing. It is worm-free and thorn-free, right? But there's this beautiful relationship between Adam and Eve. There's this beautiful relationship between them and God. Everything is the way it was created to be. All right? And then what happens? They make this conscious choice, right? to listen to the voice of the tempter. And all of a sudden, this whole order, this whole beautiful place that God had made, their very souls, right, are plunged into something called the fall with a capital F, right? The fall of sin. They fall into this, and that breaks this perfect thing that God has made, all right? So all creation was formed by God. It was perfect in the beginning. And all creation was given for the good of man. Let's talk a little bit about this, all right? So Genesis 1, look with me at Genesis 1, verse 28, all right? So a little further down, we get through all the 6 days of creation, and then God makes man in his own image in verse 26. And then in verse 28, God blessed them. God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on the earth. God said, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so, all right? And then here's this great pronouncement, right? God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was...
Good.
It was very good. It was very good. And there was evening and there was morning the 6th day. You're not wrong. You're not wrong, right? But it's exponentially better. It's very good, all right? Here's the thing. First of all, while creation was pronounced good, God says again and again and again, this is good, this is good, this is good. It's not until the completion of the work of man, right, and the giving of dominion of the earth to man that God then says, this is very good. This is the way, this is complete. This is the way I want it to be, okay? So that's an important aspect of this, right? And we talked a little bit about how a couple weeks ago, man being made in the image of God, therefore this idea of him having dominion or ruler, being a ruler over the earth, is connected to that image-bearing quality, all right? So we see in this, you guys, that humankind is the pinnacle of creation, right? Humankind is the pinnacle of creation. We are at the top of the order here because man alone bears the image of God, and man alone is capable of personal relationship with the Creator, all right? Now, everything in creation owes its existence, its identity, right, to the Creator. So that, I'm not saying that God is disconnected from everything he has made, not in the least. Yet it is to humans that God has invested his Spirit, right, he is made in his image, and he gives this responsibility of representing him or having dominion over the earth, right? Their goal as the vice regents or the stewards of the garden, right, is that they would represent God to creation, all right? But we see in this, you guys, that God says all the plants of the field, right, all these fruits, all these veggies, all that kind of stuff, right, it's for you guys to eat, right? This is here to supply for your needs, all right? So the created order exists for man. Now, creation exists to glorify its creator, but it's also to serve the needs of Adam and Eve in the garden, all right? Now, that's why, I think that's so important, that's why when Adam and Eve sinned, because they've been given this responsibility of stewarding and nurturing creation, caring for it, tending for it, helping it produce, right? That their sin affects not just their own bodies, but this very soil that they're walking on, right? Do you guys see that, right? Because they are the representatives to God of this place that he has made, right? And God's representative to the place. Their sin, therefore, impacts the very ground that they're walking on, all right? And we see that in the curse that's pronounced in chapter 3. Look at chapter 3, verse 16, all right? So they sin, and God calls them out on it, right? They try to blame shift, but then they finally come clean. And there's this curse that is pronounced, starting in verse 16, all right? To the woman, God said, I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. That's a bad thing, by the way. You kind of read that in that old kind of language, and it's like, oh, I don't quite understand what's going on there, right? When it says that your desire shall be for your husband, ladies, that's not like, oh man, my man is a looker, right? I'm so attracted to him, right? That's, hubba hubba kind of thing, right? That's not at all what that's saying there, right? That's saying, man, a husband is going to want to be in control. He's going to want to rule. He's going to want to keep his wife under his thumb, right? That's going to be a tendency. But for a woman, for a wife, right, the tendency is going to be to want to throw that rule off, right, to take the role of leadership away from the husband and command and rule in that household, right? And that's not in the way God had initially intended it in his design for marriage, right? And so that's broken, all right? But then it goes on. Verse 17, to Adam he said, because you've listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. Do you see that? Do you guys see that? You guys all right over there? Stay with me for a few more minutes, all right? The ground is cursed because of Adam's choice, all right? In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. All right? Everything that God made, right? Man to love this work of tending the garden, of it to be rewarding, right? All of a sudden that's turned on its head. Man's sin impacts the plants that he's supposed to care for, the soil he's walking on. Thorns and thistles are now what the ground is going to produce, right? And his work is going to be labor. It's going to be hard, and he's going to sweat for it, right? And so this curse is pronounced both on people and on everything in the created order, right? And so now we see, you guys, that nothing in nature functions the way it was intended, right? When it comes to nature, we see storms, we see pollution, we see natural disasters, we see vicious animals, right? In our physical bodies, we see disease and weakness and old age. In our relationships, we see conflict, division, violence, and abuse. In our mechanical world, right, our cars break, right? That beautiful device, that brand new iPhone 6S that I had, just a few short years ago, is now old and obsolete and doesn't hold battery anymore, okay? So here's the thing, our mechanical things break, they die down, our appliances are no longer new. In human culture, we experience things like racism, corrupt government, and perverted justice. In work, we have poor pay, poor hours, discrimination, and ruthlessness. In academia, right, you got to slave for those grades, right? Only to have an unjust teacher give you a grade you don't deserve, right? In all these kind of scenarios, okay? In all these kinds of scenarios, we see the way sin has impacted every single area of our world. As a matter of fact, Romans actually goes on to say it this way. He uses three phrases that I want to pull out of here, right? It says that for the creation was subjected to futility, all right? Not willingly, but because of him who subjected it in hope, that creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. And not only the creation, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit grown inwardly as we await eagerly for adoption as sons, or redemption of our bodies. There's a lot of stuff to talk about there, but what I want us to focus on are those three phrases: subjected to futility or frustration, bondage to corruption, and the pains of childbirth. Now listen to this, all right? You ever been frustrated about something? Probably even tonight, all right? Some of us are frustrated that the smell in the air is like burning our brains out through our noses right now, that kind of thing, right? Okay. So there's frustration, right? What is frustration? What does it mean to be frustrated?
Anger.
Anger, all right? Why? Why am I angry? I'm sorry? Unhappy or uncomfortable? Okay, why? Things aren't going my way, which means what? I'm selfish. My plans are not lining up, right? The thing that this was what I had control over, right? This was going to go this way. No. That's not happening now. My plans are messed up, right? I'm experiencing frustration. And so from everything like traffic, the irritation of traffic, did anybody try to get on 55 yesterday? Oh my goodness, accident shutting down everything. You were going to drive for an hour to find another route around where you were going to go. It was terrible, all right? Irritation, frustration, right? Everything from that to disasters like the hurricanes that we just experienced a couple months ago, all right? All these things, you guys, sin has frustrated the cosmos. It has frustrated our world. It does not function according to the way it was supposed to anymore, all right? That's what it means when it says that the world was subjected to these things, because it wasn't willing, right? And yet sin impressed something upon it that now it must deal with. And therefore it's in bondage to corruption or to decay. Bondage, right? It's like in chains, right? It can't get out, right? There's an inability to reverse the process. And God's original plan in life was to give way to life. But sin has inflicted death on our world that none of us will escape, right? Sin has broken this world, and none of us can escape that. But then there's this image of childbirth, right? Groaning together in the pains of childbirth. I think it's interesting that the curse in Genesis 3 is on the wife, that there's going to be pain connected to bearing a child, right? And yet there's this beautiful image of, while there is intense pain and intense suffering that is connected to that act, a child is going to be born on the other side of that, right? And so that's the image that Paul uses here in Romans 8 to say that this world, it's like it's in childbirth, right? It's like there's something beautiful that's going to happen just a little bit longer, right? But in the meantime, it's suffering. In the meantime, it's waiting and aching and groaning, right? And waiting for this thing to happen. Our experience in the midst of all this, you guys, is struggle and pain. Because just right now, but just because right now is painful doesn't mean that it always will be, okay? One day, God is going to make things right. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here. So, Man was responsible for stewarding creation, so his sin impacted the very soil. Now, let me ask you this question, okay? Because it's already broken, right? Because I look around, the world's already messed up, right? And because I've been given dominion over this messed up place as a human being, does that just mean that humankind has the right to extort what it needs out of the earth and not care at all for nature, not care at all for the created order? Is that the prerogative that we are given? Okay, I see some heads shaking no. Why? If it's already broken, right, and if it's supposed to meet my needs, why can I not just take what I want from the earth and then not really be concerned about the ramifications?
Because we're supposed to be good stewards of the land that God has given us.
Yeah, what does it mean to be a good steward, Michael?
To take care of it and use it properly and not just destroy it, but actually prune it and...
Prune it is the word you use. You guys know what happens when you prune something?
Make
It grows back.
It grows back, right? So you snip something off, something that's dead, and in order that it can grow a little more, right? That's a great image, Michael, for what our role is. Now, of course, that's sort of an agricultural image. Not everybody around here. I don't think. Are you guys like pruning rose bushes like every day? Is that like your occupation? Probably not, right? So let's put that into our terms. Like, what does that mean for us when it comes to the choices that we make as human beings in regard to taking care of our planet, taking care of our world? How should we understand our responsibility here? What do you guys think?
I think our responsibility is to show the Lord to other people that don't have the Lord, because it's kind of like pruning it, like snipping off their old habits and
Yep.
creating new ones for them.
All right, so that's a spiritual responsibility, right? The Great Commission would tell me that I'm supposed to make disciples of all the nations. All right, does that have any ramifications for the soil that I'm walking on, or the place that I live, the resources that I use? Right? This is a big question. Right? And it's a hotly debated question in our world today, right? The way I want to think about this is this way, all right? We don't want to be the type of people that take advantage without regarding what the consequences for our decisions could be. Are you with me in that? We don't want to just constantly do things, make choices, make decisions that we're not thinking about. Well, what's the ripple effect? What's gonna be the outcome if I constantly do this thing? All right. Now, the consequence of the fall. One of the consequences of the fall is that everything in creation that was once good can be abused. Right? It can be used for the wrong purposes. It can be used in a way that is sinful. All right. And everything, like we saw with the Sphinx, right? Everything good in creation can now wear out. It can be just gone. Right. And so the question for us that we need to wrestle with is, how do we really steward a broken earth? What's the appropriate level of care that human beings can give for this planet, right? I don't know if any of you guys follow anything in popular culture or the news. I don't know if any of you know this face. All right? Yeah. So this is a really interesting conversation. All right. Now I want to just put my cards on the table here for a second. Right. I don't agree with everything that this young lady had to say. All right. And I don't agree with necessarily the opposite thing, which is a position that a lot of conservative Christians take, which is we don't really need to be concerned about a lot of this stuff. Right. But what I want us to see is that this is a young girl. Right. She's 16 years old. All right. She's a Swedish activist. And she went from like holding a silent protest on the street to in 1 year inspiring like climate protests, in all these different cities in all the world. So first of all, I want to tell you guys that don't ever think that you don't have an impact that couldn't like inspire lots and lots of people to do things, okay? But here's the thing. She keeps saying these things about how we need to be concerned about this planet, right? The science is saying one thing, right? And a lot of people in an older generation are saying, we don't have to worry about that, right? We're just talking, we're talking a big talk, right? We're going to take care of it. It's going to be fine. Don't worry about it, And I'm obviously over summarizing every position in here, okay? We need to find some type of middle balance between these two things, all right? Because on one hand, what we need to realize as Christians who stand, as God's agents in this world, is that we are responsible for the choices that we make, right? And so if we don't do things like care for our planet, there's going to be repercussions for that, all right? And if we don't care for the needs of people around us, there's going to be repercussions for that. However, we cannot save our earth from its brokenness. Okay, it is impaired by sin in such a way that no matter how much we invest, no matter how much we dig into this problem, right, we're never going to reach the point where the earth all of a sudden is going to last forever. Are you with me in this? All right, because it is irreparably broken by sin. The only solution for absolutely saving and caring for this earth is found in the work that God is going to do in the end. All right, but we need to balance. All right, I guess what I'm just trying to say is we need to be conscious of the effects that we have, the choices that we make, and the way that we demonstrate that we care about this earth, because God cares about this earth. He made it, right? He made it to be something, and it, it was terrible and heart-wrenching for God that He made humans because of the way that they responded in sin and the way that they would break further the things that He had made. All right. And here's the other thing we have to keep in mind. You and I have inherited this world from our forefathers, right? From people who have gone before us, from cultures who have risen and fallen, and the decisions that they've made, right? So we've inherited this context, all right? And yet we cannot blame the people who came before us for everything that we find ourselves in, all right? Because we take personal responsibility for the choices that we make, all right? We might say, yes, there were some bad decisions made in environmental decisions and the way that people went about building things, and whatever the case might be, all right? We could say that, right? We could say it's all their fault, right? Here's this problem, okay? And some of that might be true, but ultimately we are still sinners as well, and we are responsible for what we do with this moment and in this time. Does that make sense? Okay. The worst thing we can do in any type of these scenarios is point fingers at other people. We have to think about what's my role in this, and how can I take responsibility for what God has called me as an individual to do as part of a greater Christian community, to love and care for everything that God has made. Okay, that's my whole thing on this. Okay, so God made creation; it was good for the good of man. And then lastly, here's our point. All right, all creation is broken, but God does still care for it. We should still care because God still cares. Okay, as a matter of fact, God sustains what He has made. Colossians 1:17 says that it all holds together by the word of His power. All right. He sustains these things, all right? And ultimately, God didn't abandon creation after man sinned, right? God could have said in this moment, right, in Genesis 3, where Adam and Eve eat that apple, or whatever the fruit was, right? He could have said, I'm done, right? And walked away and left the earth to crumble on its own, right? But that's not what He does, all right? He doesn't even abandon it after He sends this global flood on the earth. Look at Genesis chapter 8. Just turn over a couple of pages. Look at the way this whole thing subsides, right? So God He's grieved in His spirit in Genesis 6 because earth is full of wickedness. He actually says in Genesis 6:7, I will blot out man whom I have made from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry that I have made them. They've gotten that wicked. They've gotten that bad, all right? But then after the flood, right, after He judges the earth, He rescues this righteous family in Noah. The waters go down, and then chapter 8, verse 20, it says, Noah built an altar to the Lord, took some of every clean animal and some of every clean bird, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And when the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, the Lord said in His heart, I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I ever again strike down every living creature as I have done, while the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. Right? You see that? Like, God is, don't misunderstand, God is one day going to judge everything that exists. He is going to do this work of judgment, all right? It's going to be different than it was in the flood. But God is saying in this, like, this is His world that He has made. It is His beautiful creation, right? Though it's broken by sin, He's never again going to curse the ground because of man. Because man is permanently wicked now, this side of the fall, right? And it's not going to be until He comes and finishes this work when He returns, right? When Christ returns, that all that will be made new, that all of that will be changed, right? But what we see is that God doesn't abandon the creation, even in judgment, right? Even judging the earth with flood means God is involved, not distant, right? He wants it to be purified for His purposes, all right? Another passage that comes to mind is a one that you guys might recognize. In Ecclesiastes 3 says, God makes all things beautiful in their time, right? And what I love about that is it's kind of part of a bigger conversation about how, what type of joy can a man possibly find in this toil on the earth, right? Everything is suffering, right? And yet he then goes on to say that, well, the best thing to do is to enjoy this life that God has given you, to enjoy the work that He set before you, right? And so part of that is that, we recognize that there is intense suffering in our world today, right? Whether the result of natural disasters, whether the result of people being jerks to each other, right? Whatever the case might be, we see the suffering. We know it's real. Yet Ecclesiastes would tell us that even in those hard moments, right, God makes those things beautiful as they come to fruition, right? As we look back at them and realize, man, that is what God was doing all that time, right? God does that. He takes broken things and gives them this beautiful purpose. And ultimately, Revelation 21 tells us that God is one day going to work this new creation. He's going to do something that is going to make all things new. And again, this is another one of those areas where a lot of people have differences of opinions on how that's going to work out in the end. I tend to be of the mindset that the work that God is going to do is going to be a redemption of this place, right? He's going to take this earth and this place and the people that have chosen to follow in the name of Jesus Christ, right? And he's going to make all those things new, right? And he's going to work this new creation. I love the way in the Lord of the Rings, and the Lord of the Rings nerd, at the end of it, when everything, they've thrown the ring into the fire, right? And Sam and Frodo are kind of retreating down the mountain. Sam says to Frodo, "Is everything sad going to come undone?" All right? And I love that. I love that phrasing, because it's kind of like, everything sad is still, like, the memory of it is still there, right? And yet it's going to be remade into something that is beautiful, okay? And I think that's this image. I think that's the theme of the scriptures, right? That God's heart is for this redemption. Now, he's especially concerned for people. And I think that's the ultimate conclusion we need to come to, right? God takes his broken place, and he's going to work a new creation in Revelation 21. But ultimately, he's going to take man who's marred by sin, and he's going to transform him through the power of Jesus Christ, right? We have faith in this one, Jesus Christ, right? He's going to do something new in our hearts now, and he's going to finish a work of creation in the future. Let me go back to Paul Tripp, because he doesn't end with where we left him off, all right? He finishes this section in this way, all right? So we're back to the instant of sin, right, in the garden. In an instant, fear, guilt, and shame became standard human experiences. People who once lived in perfect harmony now accused, deceived, and fought for control. Weeds and disease became daily concerns. People began to desire what was evil and do what was wrong. Rather than submit to God's authority, they lived as their own gods. The world that once sang the song of perfection now groaned under the weight of the fall, capital F. Sin altered every thought, desire, word, and deed. It created a world of double-mindedness and mixed motives, self-worship and self-absorption. People desired to be served, but they hated serving. They craved control and nurtured delusions of self-sufficiency. They forgot their Creator, but worshipped his creation. Rather than loving people and using things to express it, people loved things and used people to get them. Humanity's second generation even committed murder. They began to lie, cheat, hide, and deny. People suffered at the hands of others, from momentary thoughtlessness to unspeakable acts of physical and sexual abuse. For the first time, people wept from grief within and suffering without. God now saw his world ravaged by sin. He was unwilling for it to stay this way, so he devised a plan. It would take thousands of years. It would mean harnessing the forces of nature and controlling the course of human history, but he would do it. From the moment of the fall, for generation after generation, he controlled everything so that someday he could fix what had been so horribly damaged into this world at just the right moment. He sent his one and only Son. All right? You guys, that's our hope. That's our hope, because if you and I look around at this world, it looks terrible. Right? It looks terrible. Everything is broken. Things are failing, right? Our systems are breaking down. Our relationships are broken, right? We see sickness and age coming upon us. At least some of us see age coming upon us, right? And we recognize that things are not the way they were intended to be, okay? And so we could either despair and think, man, it's all on my shoulders to fix this, or I could place my hope and my confidence in the one who came, right? He came about 2,000 years ago, walked this earth, lived a perfect life, and died in my place to buy my soul back, all right, from the sin that it had been sold to, okay? Place my hope in there, and remember this incredible promise that as he went to heaven, he said, I will come again, and I'm going to make all things new, all right? Guys, that's our hope. That's our trust. That's our confidence, all right? That's what the Word of God would teach us, all right? So that's our conversation for tonight, okay? All creation was made, it was formed by God, it was perfect. All creation was given for the good of man. All creation is broken, right? It is no longer perfect, but God still cares for it. And ultimately, God is not done, all right? That's our hope, that's our promise. So let's pray, and we'll break up into our recap groups. Father, thank you.